Hey friends, welcome to episode 13 of our science fiction book read along. This week we are reading the first 5 pages or so of chapter 34. We're skipping ahead, and next time we'll be reading from chapter 38. As always, leave your questions and thoughts in the comments to this video, and I look forward to hearing your impressions of this chapter. All right, so chapter 34, Government, starts with a memo from Ronnie Drake to Misha, subject, plans, date, June 14th, 59,706. Origin, Verdance Corporation, least cost path, VD Hab Cartier, 0.001, Turtle Wormhole, 3.2, Tisdale Station, 0.9, Sasky Sat, 0.05. What is the holdup? This should be a quick turnaround. I can see you are still at Spider City. We don't need input from the Spider people, just a simple way to secure their agreement. End memo. The council meeting was sparsely attended. There was nothing to vote on, and very few people had the expertise required to weigh in on questions of public transit governance. Obsidian, head of urban planning, had interrupted Sulfur and Misha's presentation to deliver bad news. I've been in touch with Cylindra, who manages templates for Emerald. She said she met with you in Left Hand. That's right. She's refusing to allow any public transit inside her cities. She sent us a long memo about it. Misha was taken aback. I knew she wasn't interested in trains, but Verdance is obligated to provide some form of public transit for the entire planet. It's part of the development deal. Obsidian's white hair was a tangled mane around the dubious expression on their face. I pointed that out, but she hates the idea of any kind of transit. She said, and I quote, that it would spoil the virgin beauty of the Emerald Cities. Which is utter nonsense. I got the feeling that there's some kind of festering wound between her and Verdance management. I guess she used to work there? Sulfur had the urge to spill everything they knew about Cylindra's role in the Archaean templates, but held back. She was hostile when we met with her. The group of Archaea around the table and on remote screens went silent as they exchanged back-channel chat. A member of the boring fleet, Alcohol, spoke through the mouth of a holographic moose. The actual vessel was far below this room, floating in a river of lava. Reading over this memo that we got from Cylindra's office, it seems that she's exploited a loophole in the contract. Public transit must link cities, but there's nothing about putting stations inside city limits. Technically, Verdance would be fulfilling its obligations if we built stations on the outermost periphery. Rocket made a crash and burn noise. So she's suggesting we build tracks up to the edge of the city and stop there? Frustrated, Sulfur practically growled. That's unacceptable. If you looked at the data we've been gathering, linking the cities using train tracks pretty much guarantees that public transit will become obsolete. We need a solution that doesn't rely on tracks and can go into the cities when it's needed. The head of council for this meeting was Acorn, a young decanting engineer who knew Zest well enough to give the cow a hug when they arrived at the meeting. Acorn scratched one freckled elbow and frowned. What do you have in mind? I can't imagine Spider joining a transit network like the one Cylindra is proposing. We're not going to perturb our environment with tracks if there will be no benefit to people. It's a shame, Obsidian shook their head. Our surveys show that a lot of people would like to visit the new cities. That's fine if you're able to fly, but... Wait a minute, Rocket emitted the sound of screeching tires. Alcohol, does Cylindra's proposal say anything about setting up stations inside the city without building tracks? A few people started to ask confused questions, but Alcohol was satisfied to answer literally. No, it does not. She says no tracks inside the city limits. There are no comments about stations. An excited drumbeat was coming from Rocket now. We can make flying trains. There's no rule that says Verdance trains have to run on tracks. A train can't fly, Misha was frustrated. We talked about this before. I'm not going to put gravity mesh into something that isn't a person. It's dangerous. Excuse me, the holographic moose was speaking, channeling alcohol from the magma surging deep beneath their feet. I'm sorry, but why are we building vehicles that aren't people? Everyone went silent as the messages between them became an uproar. Though Sulfur had become overwhelmingly partial to pretty much everything about Misha, They were not impressed with his argument today. Rocket is right, they said. Flying trains would solve a lot of problems. We'd avoid damaging wildlife with tracks, and we could alter routes more easily. The cities are going to change and move around a lot over the next millennium, and a flying fleet would be a lot more sustainable. Zest perked up. Plus, we met some engineers when we were on our survey who have solved the traveling herbivore problem. We could implement it in the train's mind, too. Imagine a train that would always take the optimal route between cities. Who are these engineers? Are they ERT? Acorn was practically vibrating with excitement. The cow immediately became evasive. She'd promised to reveal nothing about the worms after all. They are not ERT, but they're allies. Solving that problem is huge. How do I not know them? Acorn folded their arms and another huge text chain blew up around the edges of the mouth conversation. Misha couldn't contain his anger. Stop polluting this discussion with your nitter-natter about the traveling herbivore problem. He stood up, face flushed and dark eyes flashing. Verdance will never allow us to propose a new life form as public transit, and we shouldn't do it anyway. It's not ethical and it's not practical. I beg to differ, Alcohol replied. Sentient transit is the very best kind. Only we are flexible enough to truly serve the public. Why are you so against this, Misha? Sulfur was frozen inside. They didn't like seeing this aspect of Misha's personality. He yanked Cylindra's memo out of the air and slapped it down on the table, scrolling through. See this section? Cylindra is also refusing to connect the Emerald Cities to any transit network that includes Spider City because of what she's calling cross-contamination from broken templates. She's inserted a bunch of language about how every city in the network must abide by the intelligence assessment standards she's implemented in Left Hand. He gave Zest a significant look. She's trying to force every city on the planet to abide by Emerald's INAS templates. The whole outburst had left Obsidian puzzled. You know there is no way for them to enforce these INAS standards outside the Emerald Cities, right? They simply don't have jurisdiction. She's playing some weird corporate game, trying to get something out of Verdance, I assume. Sulfur thought back to the way they'd gotten under Cylindra's skin by mentioning Ronnie. This memo must be the Emerald VP's way of needling her old boss by making nonsensical demands. Obsidian is right, Sulfur mused. All we have to do is pit Ronnie against Cylindra and let them scratch at each other while the ERT builds some flying trains. It's true that this memo seems more aimed at Verdance than at us, Misha admitted. Then he frowned. But still, it's our problem to solve. We can't build new people to fix this for us. We'd be dumping all our crap onto innocent creatures who would have to carry tourists around. Not just tourists. Alcohol sounded testy, and the moose hologram lowered its head as if about to charge. They'll be carrying every kind of person all over Sasky, maybe even across the ocean to Tooth. Sounds like a pretty good job to me. Plus, they wouldn't all have to become transit. Sasky is a big place. A flying train could be an engineer, a game designer, or a farmer if they wanted. They could help the ERT with rescue missions. Plenty will be left who like doing transit. Misha's jaw was clenched. But what if you're wrong and none of them want to fly people around? Or are you going to program them to want it? The room filled with the sound of boring fleet vessels laughing like wind chimes. Apparently, Alcohol was sharing this moose avatar and the conversation with their comrades. We of the Boring Fleet are not programmed to enjoy making subterranean infrastructure, but like all creatures, we find it satisfying to do things that our bodies excel at. Just like you hominins like to poke at machines with your hands and run your floppy mouths. And moose like to swim. Our bodies shape what we consider pleasant, whether that's work or play. Rocket blared an upbeat horn flourish. Exactly right. Not every train will want to do the same thing, but I'm not worried about the flying train fleet will be averse to the thrill of designing optimal routes and visiting hundreds of cities across the globe. People texted back and forth, and Misha hunched his shoulders as if warding off an incoming blow. Acorn spoke up in a non-sequitorial way that suggested they were replying to a longer text chain Sulfur hadn't read. Sure, I don't see why we couldn't mock up some templates this afternoon. Alcohol has ideas about morphology, and Zest gave me really interesting brain models with 2 separate ganglia. They paused and looked at Zest. What exactly is this a model of? The cow flicked an ear and looked at Sulfur for help. We got it from those engineers who solved the traveling herbivore problem. They were doing field work. Something to do with agriculture, Sulfur added, making a big show of gazing off into the distance and checking their memory stores. You know, it wasn't relevant to our mission, so I didn't take any notes. Acorn shrugged. Whatever, I love this design. That's not why we came here. Mish's voice was low but loud. Sulfur and Rocket told me that this council would discuss government transit regulations with us. Right now, Spider City has the only independent government on this whole stinking planet, and instead of thinking about how we'd build a system for collectively managing a planet-wide resource, you want to bring a bunch of trains into the Great Bargain. He glared at Sulfur for several seconds before including the entire table in his scornful gaze. Obsidian was offended. We are all allies in the Great Bargain, they said, paraphrasing the ERT handbook. That's untreated sewage and you know it. Who is going to be in charge of this flying train fleet? How will every city weigh in on their transit needs? How will we know when new trains are needed or new routes and stations? What if Cylindra changes her mind and the Emerald Cities decide they want to use the entire fleet? Who decides how many they actually get and brokers the compromise? Misha was clearly working himself up to say more, but alcohol cut him off, their voice chiming out of the moose avatar. Don't you understand yet, Homo sapiens? If we make the trains into people, then they can decide for themselves. They can manage themselves, like the boring fleet does. Exactly. Obsidian sat back, satisfied. Sometimes the best way to handle resources is to perceive when they aren't resources at all. They are people. Maybe it's hard for you to understand because everyone at L'Orange is slaved. But that's what it means to govern. A government's job is to recognize people, to help them make their own agreements with each other. And if you do your job well, those people become your political allies. I'm not saying things are good at L'Orange, but what you're describing is incredibly naive. These aren't people yet. We don't need to make them people. In fact, if we do make them people, our public transit will depend on the will of... Misha waved his hand in the air as if scattering flies. Sasky needs a dependable transit infrastructure, not a bunch of people who have opinions about optimal routes. A lot of people on Sasky are already working as mounts, Zest said gently. They are mostly treated like chattel, though it would be nice to build someone to do that job who could actually broker the agreements as to how it would be done. A door opened in the back of the council room, where members of the public entered to sit on the tiered bleachers carved into the circular walls. Currently, the bleachers were about a quarter full, so the stranger standing there wouldn't have to walk far for a seat. Instead, they strode directly to the front row tier at the bottom. Oh, great, Acorn perked up. This is tough for my lab. That was fast. Yeah, so I mocked up the train you were describing earlier with the dual brain structure. I honestly don't see any problems with it. It's all taken from well-tested templates with a few tweaks. I could build the first one in about a week, and then it would get faster. Sulfur grinned and spread their hands in a look at all this gesture. You see, the train is easy to build, and it's safe. Misha folded his arms and glowered. We have to run this by Ronnie. If I bring her a fleet of intelligent trains, she could murder them all. If we make them here at Spider City, Verdance technically doesn't have any jurisdiction over them. It's true. That's one of the many reasons why I wanted this body. Rocket gestured at their rainbowing carapace. Because it was manufactured here, I became a Spider City person when I ported to it. That's how you did it? Misha sat back in his chair, blinking. So far, it's worked too. Verdance never even tried to claim me. And with that, we end our reading for today. Join us next time for a reading from Chapter 38. As always, leave your thoughts and opinions, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks again, guys. Have a good night.